The reunion ended late Sunday night. Nora spent Monday cleaning, exhausted but grateful. It wasn't until Tuesday morning, while going through her online banking, that she noticed something she couldn't ignore. Her savings account had dropped by $30,000 overnight. Panic gripped her. She immediately called her bank. The transactions had been authorized via her own online access, but Nora knew she hadn't done it. The money had been transferred to an account she didn't recognize. An account under Kyle's name. Confused and betrayed, she called Hannah. Her sister sounded annoyed more than guilty. "Oh, that," Hannah said, laughing lightly. "Kyle told you we'd take care of it later. We needed it more than you did, Nora. You don't have a family to support like we do." Nora sat in stunned silence, the phone pressed to her ear. Kyle's voice came on the line, casual, arrogant. "It's just money, Nora. You're not even using it. We have kids to raise. You should be helping family. Don't make this a big thing." Nora hung up without a word. She had worked 2 jobs for years, carefully building that savings as her emergency fund. She had sacrificed vacations, dinners, and luxuries. And now, with a few clicks, they had decided they deserved it more than she did. The betrayal burned deep. But Nora didn't scream, didn't threaten. She closed her laptop, sat back, and calmly began to plan. They thought she was powerless. They had no idea what she was capable of when pushed too far. Nora didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, memories from the past flooding back, all the times Hannah had taken from her without asking. Childhood moments when Nora's birthday gifts mysteriously disappeared into Hannah's hands. College years when Nora worked double shifts while Hannah lived rent-free with boyfriends. And now, even in adulthood, nothing had changed. Hannah still saw her as someone to take from, but Nora wasn't the naive girl she once was. By morning, she had made a decision. She wouldn't call the police, not yet. She knew how quickly family could turn a crime into a misunderstanding in the eyes of outsiders. Instead, she began gathering evidence. Quietly, methodically. Every screenshot, every bank statement, every text message was saved into a private folder on her computer. At work, Nora forced herself to smile. She didn't tell her coworkers, not even her closest friend, Diane. No one would know what was brewing behind her calm demeanor. It was a valuable lesson she had learned after decades of being underestimated. The quieter you are, the more they show you who they really are. In the evenings, Nora began reaching out subtly to other family members. Not about the money. No, not directly. She asked polite questions, gently steering conversations toward Kyle and Hannah's financial behavior. Slowly, stories began to spill out. Borrowed money never repaid. Promises broken. Investments borrowed and lost. A pattern stretching back years. Worse yet, she learned that her niece, Ellie, Hannah's own daughter, had confided to an aunt that Kyle was pressuring her to give him access to her college fund. Nora's heart tightened with a cold, determined anger. They weren't just thieves, they were predators, and family had covered for them for too long. By the weekend, Nora had a timeline, a pattern of behavior, and a growing list of allies who, when the time came, might not side with Hannah and Kyle as blindly as before. But she still needed more. She needed them to believe they had won, to become arrogant enough to make mistakes. So when Hannah called that Saturday morning, chirping about how they might need a little more help because Kyle's truck was on its last legs, Nora played her part perfectly. "Oh, of course, Hannah," she said sweetly. "Family comes first." She even agreed to meet for lunch the next day, pretending to be the same trusting sister she had always been. As she hung up the phone, a small smile crossed her lips. They were walking right into the trap she was building, and when it closed, it would be airtight. Nora chose a small diner on the edge of town for their lunch. It wasn't fancy, but it was public enough to keep things civil if tensions rose. She arrived early, settling into a corner booth where she could see the door. The waitress, a young woman named Paige she knew vaguely, brought her a coffee. Nora smiled warmly, tipping a little extra. She wanted no distractions today. When Hannah and Kyle finally swept in, they were all wide smiles and fake affection. Hannah wore a new designer handbag Nora hadn't seen before. Kyle's watch, too, looked suspiciously expensive. Nora's stomach turned, but she forced a laugh as Kyle slapped her back like they were old friends. "You're a lifesaver, Nora," Hannah gushed, leaning in as if they were conspirators. "Kyle said you always were the smart one." Nora sipped her coffee slowly. "Well, I try," she said lightly. They ordered food, Kyle choosing the most expensive steak on the menu, and Hannah wasted no time steering the conversation toward their problems. Kyle's truck had finally broken down, she said. Repairs would cost more than it was worth. They needed a new one. "Just something basic," Hannah assured her. "Nothing fancy." Nora nodded sympathetically, hiding her rising fury. They hadn't even paid back the $30,000, and here they were, eyes gleaming with entitlement, plotting their next theft. As they rambled on, Nora asked innocent-sounding questions. "How's work, Kyle? Still at the construction company?" Kyle chuckled, exchanging a glance with Hannah. "Actually, I left. Starting my own business now, construction consulting. More money, more freedom." Nora raised an eyebrow. She knew Kyle barely managed to hold down a regular job, let alone run a business. But she kept her tone supportive. "That sounds exciting. Startup costs must be tough, though." Kyle grinned. "Exactly. We're investing in our future, you know? That's why family needs to pitch in sometimes." "Of course," Nora said sweetly. Inside, she was noting every word, every admission. Kyle had just inadvertently revealed he wasn't working, meaning their financial situation was even shakier than she realized. When lunch ended, Hannah dabbed her lips delicately and leaned in. "We were wondering if you could help us out with a little more, say, $15,000? Just a loan. We'll pay you back. Promise." Nora smiled warmly, even as her heart turned cold. "Let me think about it," she said. "I'll call you tomorrow." She left cash for her meal and walked out, the bells above the diner door jingling behind her. In her car, she sat gripping the steering wheel. They were sinking deeper into their lies. And now, she had their arrogance on full display. Tomorrow, she wouldn't call to offer help. Tomorrow, the next phase of her plan would begin. The next morning, Nora moved quietly but deliberately. First, she called an old friend, Linda Harper, who worked at the local bank. Over coffee at Linda's house that afternoon, Nora laid everything out, not dramatically, but with careful, calm precision. Linda listened with a furrowed brow. "Nora, transferring money without permission is fraud. You could go to the police right now." "I know," Nora said, "but if I do it too soon, they'll spin the story. I want something even they can't deny." Linda nodded slowly. She agreed to help Nora discreetly get certified copies of the bank transactions. And something even better, the IP address logs showing exactly where the online transfers had been made. Evidence that couldn't be argued away. Meanwhile, Nora set another piece of her plan into motion. She contacted her cousin Mark, a straightforward, no-nonsense man who had always distrusted Kyle. She asked for his help in organizing a casual, family dinner at his house, suggesting they gather everyone the following weekend for a potluck. Nothing formal, just family catching up. Mark agreed immediately, unaware of the deeper reason behind Nora's suggestion. By the end of the week, invitations were sent out, and Hannah eagerly confirmed. Kyle, of course, would be there too, likely thinking another gathering would offer him another chance to pressure Nora privately. Nora smiled bitterly to herself. It would be the last gathering where they controlled the story. In the evenings, Nora battled waves of anger. She wasn't a vengeful person by nature. She hated conflict. But what they had done wasn't just stealing money. It was robbing her of trust, peace, and dignity. They had looked her in the eye and treated her like a fool. She wouldn't scream or beg for justice. She would simply lay the truth bare in front of everyone they had manipulated for years and watch the house of cards collapse. By Friday night, Linda sent her a discreet message. The certified documents and IP logs were ready. Nora picked them up in a plain envelope, her hands shaking slightly as she tucked it into her purse. The trap was set. All she had to do now was wait. The afternoon of the family gathering arrived bright and warm, a rare mild day that fooled everyone into thinking it would be pleasant. Nora arrived early, carrying a homemade apple pie and a calm smile. Mark and his wife, Karen, were bustling in the kitchen, setting out dishes and arranging chairs. The smell of baked ham and fresh rolls filled the air. "You look good, Nora," Karen said, giving her a quick hug. "Relaxed." Nora smiled politely. "Trying my best." As guests trickled in, the house filled with the low murmur of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter. Children ran in and out of the yard. Old family photos were passed around. On the surface, it was an ordinary family gathering. But Nora watched everything with sharp, steady eyes. Hannah and Kyle arrived about an hour in, making their usual grand entrance. Kyle clapped Mark on the back like an old war buddy, while Hannah air-kissed Karen's cheek and gushed about how wonderful everything looked. Nora noticed immediately. Hannah wore a new bracelet, and Kyle had a fresh pair of designer sunglasses perched on his head. Flashy, careless, insulting. Nora stayed near the kitchen, helping Karen refill the lemonade and pretending not to watch. At one point, Hannah sidled up to her, lowering her voice. "Did you think about it?" she asked, eyes gleaming. "The loan?" Nora gave a small, apologetic shrug. "Still considering." Hannah's mouth tightened slightly, but she recovered quickly, pasting on another bright smile before drifting away to gossip with a few aunts. The evening wore on. After everyone had eaten, Mark clinked a glass to get attention. "Let's do something different tonight," he said. "Everyone share a piece of good news or something funny that happened this year." There was a round of applause and good-natured groans. One by one, people shared job promotions, funny stories about kids, and travel plans. When it was Nora's turn, she stood up, her heart pounding but her face calm. "I have something a little different to share," she said, her voice even. She pulled a small folder from her purse and placed it on the coffee table. People leaned in curiously. "I've been doing some work lately, protecting myself, really." She flipped open the folder, revealing copies of the bank transfers, complete with Kyle's name attached, and the IP address logs pinpointing the transaction to Kyle and Hannah's house. The room fell silent, heavy as wet wool. Kyle's face drained of color. Hannah let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "What is this, Nora?" Hannah said, her voice tight. Nora met her gaze steadily. "It's what happens when you think stealing from family has no consequences." No one spoke for a long moment. The weight of Nora's quiet accusation was undeniable, the evidence clear and damning. Mark stood up, taking the folder, flipping through the documents. His face darkened. "You took 30 grand from her?" he asked Kyle, his voice low. Kyle tried to speak, but only managed to stammer. Hannah's face twisted, cycling through denial, outrage, and panic. Nora folded her hands calmly in front of her. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, the truth laid bare between them all. Kyle was the first to break the silence. "This is ridiculous!" he barked, standing so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Nora must have misunderstood something. We would never steal from family." But his voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear beneath his anger. Hannah, her face flushed and hands trembling, tried a different tactic. She stepped forward, forcing a brittle smile. "Come on, Nora. You know how close we are. You know we're family. It was just a temporary thing. We were going to pay you back." Nora didn't flinch. "Without even telling me? You think that's what family does?" Karen folded her arms across her chest, her expression unreadable. Mark looked disgusted. "What about the fact that Kyle quit his job?" Nora continued, her voice calm but firm. "What about the fact that you asked me for another $15,000 just yesterday, without mentioning the 30 you already took?" A few cousins shifted uncomfortably. Someone muttered under their breath, "Unbelievable." Kyle's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, finding none. Seeing the tides turning, Hannah suddenly changed tactics. Tears welled up in her eyes. Crocodile tears, Nora knew. "You don't understand," Hannah said, her voice wobbling. "We've been under so much stress. The kids need things. Kyle's been trying to start the business. We didn't mean to hurt you." The sympathy play. Nora kept her voice steady. "You didn't mean to hurt me. You just meant to help yourselves." For a moment, Hannah looked genuinely furious that her ploy hadn't worked. Mark stepped in then, his voice harsh. "It's not just about the money, Hannah. It's the lying, the sneaking around. the thinking you're owed something just because you're family. Kyle opened his mouth to respond, but Mark cut him off with a sharp gesture. You've been doing this for years, Mark said. Borrowing, guilt-tripping, never paying anyone back. Well, it stops now. Other voices rose in agreement. Karen, Aunt Melissa, even quiet Uncle Ron. Nora watched it happen, a bittersweet ache filling her chest. She hadn't wanted to tear the family apart, but she hadn't been the one who chose betrayal. Kyle grabbed Hannah's arm. We're leaving, he growled, his face an angry red mask. Good idea, Mark said coldly, before someone calls the police. They stormed out, slamming the door behind them. Nora remained standing, her hands steady, even though her heart raced painfully. The room was quiet again, but this time it wasn't a silence of confusion. It was solidarity. Mark clapped her gently on the shoulder. You did the right thing, Nora. It's about time someone stood up to them. Nora smiled faintly. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the weak one. But the aftermath wasn't over yet. She knew Kyle and Hannah wouldn't disappear quietly. They were wounded animals now, and wounded animals could be dangerous. It didn't take long. The next morning, Nora woke up to a flurry of text messages and missed calls. The first voicemail was from an unknown number. Kyle's voice, furious, slurred slightly as if he'd been drinking. You think you're smart? You think you can humiliate us like that? He growled. You're gonna regret this, Nora. She deleted it without hesitation, but felt her stomach tighten. The second call was from Hannah, this time crying, pleading, cursing in the same breath. You ruined our lives! Kyle lost a big investor because of you. How could you, after everything we've been through together? Nora leaned back against the kitchen counter, letting the messages roll into silence. She wasn't surprised. They were predictable. Angry when they lost control, pathetic when they couldn't manipulate her back into line. But even so, she knew better than to underestimate them. That afternoon, Nora visited her bank in person. Linda had already flagged her account for extra security, but now they added two-step verification, additional identity checks, and new account numbers. Nora closed her old savings account entirely and moved her money to a new one under a different branch. She also met briefly with a lawyer, Mr. Aldridge, an older man, sharp and methodical. She explained everything, showing him the folder of evidence. He listened carefully and nodded. They have no legal ground to stand on, he said. If they try to contact you again in any threatening way, we can file a restraining order immediately, and if you wish, you have grounds to press charges for financial fraud. Nora hesitated. Filing criminal charges felt heavy. Was she ready for that? Think about it, Mr. Aldridge said kindly. There's no rush, but don't let them think you're vulnerable. As Nora left the office, she realized something. Even though she felt some lingering sadness, mourning the family she had always wished she had, she also felt stronger than she had in years. Meanwhile, back across town, Hannah was rallying. Through quiet whispers and phone calls, she spun her own version of events to sympathetic ears. Nora was overreacting, always had issues, was jealous of their success. But unlike before, her words didn't find the eager audience she counted on. Word had spread about the documents Nora had shown. Too many had seen them with their own eyes. And worse for Hannah, Kyle was unraveling, drinking heavily, missing important meetings for his business, getting into shouting matches with friends who asked too many questions. Desperation made people sloppy. And Nora was ready, watching quietly, prepared to shield herself from whatever came next. It didn't take long for the recklessness to surface. 3 days after the family dinner, Nora returned home from the grocery store to find her mailbox torn off its post and thrown halfway down her driveway. At first, she stood there blinking, bags of food dangling from her hands. Then her eyes narrowed. She checked her front door carefully, no signs of forced entry, and scanned the perimeter of her small lakeside property. Nothing else seemed disturbed, but the message was clear: intimidation. Nora filed a police report immediately, giving the officer Kyle's name without hesitation. "We'll patrol the area more often," the officer promised. "If anything else happens, call 911 right away." That night, For the first time since the confrontation, Nora felt genuine fear curling in her gut. They had crossed from petty theft into something darker, but fear didn't stop her. It sharpened her. The next morning, Nora met again with Mr. Aldridge, her lawyer, and handed him the police report along with printed screenshots of Kyle's threatening voicemail. "This isn't just financial fraud anymore," Aldridge said grimly. "This is harassment and criminal intimidation." He advised her to move forward with both a restraining order and criminal charges, to make it official before things escalated further. Nora didn't hesitate this time. "I want to do it." By the afternoon, her lawyer had filed the paperwork. The restraining order would mean Kyle and Hannah could no longer come near her, her home, or contact her in any way without facing arrest. When Nora left the courthouse, she felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. It shouldn't have come to this. But it had. Later that evening, Mark called her. "Heard about your mailbox," he said grimly. "Just so you know, you're not alone in this. If you need anything, you call." "Thank you," Nora said, feeling emotions swell in her throat. And true to his word, the next day, a few cousins rotated by her house, checking in, making sure she wasn't alone for long stretches. Meanwhile, Hannah's anger was leaking all over town. Through a mutual friend, Nora heard that Hannah was furious. The family had turned against her, complaining loudly at a local coffee shop that Nora always thought she was better than the rest of us. Kyle, on the other hand, seemed to be crumbling. His so-called consulting business had fallen apart after word spread about the theft. No one trusted him with so much as a handshake anymore. The walls were closing in on them, and they knew it. Nora stayed steady, watching from a distance. She had defended herself without screaming, without losing her dignity. Now it was only a matter of time before Kyle and Hannah made their final, desperate move. And when they did, she would be ready. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Nora had just finished watering the small vegetable garden in her backyard when she heard tires crunching onto her gravel driveway. She straightened immediately, heart thudding, recognizing the battered pickup even before she saw Kyle's figure climbing out. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her. The restraining order was clear. Nora didn't panic. She walked calmly inside, locked the door behind her, and dialed 911 with steady fingers. From her kitchen window, she watched as Kyle staggered toward the front porch, shouting unintelligibly. He was drunk, no question about it. Behind him, Hannah climbed out of the passenger side, equally unsteady but full of ugly determination. Nora could hear her shrill voice even through the closed window. "You owe us!" Hannah screamed. "You ruined everything!" Kyle pounded on the door with the side of his fist, causing it to rattle on its hinges. Nora stayed where she was, phone pressed to her ear, giving the dispatcher the details calmly. The operator kept her talking, and within minutes, flashing blue and red lights lit up the driveway. Kyle and Hannah didn't even notice until two police officers were practically on top of them. The moment officers approached, Kyle lunged toward the porch again, shouting something about taking what's his. But before he could even touch the door, he was tackled to the ground and handcuffed. Hannah shrieked, trying to pull away from another officer who restrained her more gently but firmly. Nora watched it all unfold quietly, her hands only trembling a little now that it was over. Later, an officer knocked gently on her door. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Nora nodded. "I am now." They explained that Kyle was being charged with multiple violations: breaking a restraining order, trespassing, and attempted intimidation. Hannah, though less aggressive, would also face charges. As they were led away, Hannah threw a venomous glare at Nora, but Nora didn't react. She just closed the door quietly, shutting out the chaos. Inside, standing alone in her silent living room, Nora let out a long, shaking breath. It was over. Really over. Not just the theft, not just the money. The years of emotional manipulation, guilt, and imbalance, they were done. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly through the family. Any remaining sympathies Hannah had clung to evaporated. No one could defend what they had done now, not after police reports, restraining orders, and drunken trespassing. Mark called again, proud and supportive. So did Karen, Aunt Melissa, and even distant cousins Nora hadn't spoken to in years. For once, Nora wasn't an afterthought or a pushover. She was seen, she was respected, and most importantly, she had reclaimed her life. The following weeks passed in a slow, gentle rhythm. With Kyle and Hannah tied up in court proceedings and legally forbidden from contacting her, Nora's home became a place of true refuge again. No more glancing out the window in fear. No more waiting for the next betrayal. The quiet was profound. At first, she didn't know what to do with it. She found herself wandering through her home, hands trailing along familiar surfaces, feeling the weight she had carried for so long finally lift. The garden began to flourish again under her careful attention. She started baking on Sunday afternoons like she used to before the chaos. She even took a painting class at the local community center, something she had put off for years, always feeling she needed to be available for family emergencies that were never really emergencies at all. One evening, sitting on her porch with a cup of tea and watching the sunset ripple across the lake, Nora realized something. For most of her life, she had confused endurance with loyalty. She had believed that enduring endless disrespect, endless taking, was her duty, that family meant sacrifice without question. But now she saw it clearly. Family wasn't just blood. Family was trust. Family was respect. Family was choice. And she had finally chosen herself. A few family members drifted by from time to time, Karen with fresh vegetables from her garden, Mark helping her repair the torn mailbox post. Conversations were easy now, without the shadow of guilt and manipulation hanging overhead. On one visit, Karen squeezed Nora's hand before leaving. "You taught all of us something," she said softly. "You reminded us that standing up for yourself isn't cruel, it's necessary." Nora smiled, her heart warm, not bitter, not angry, just full. There were still scars, of course. Sometimes memories of Hannah's betrayal would creep in late at night, but they no longer held power over her. They were just that, memories. She didn't hear much more about Kyle and Hannah after the court date. Rumor had it they moved a few towns over, trying to rebuild their lives where their reputation wasn't so damaged. Nora wished them no harm, but she also felt no obligation to carry their burdens anymore. She had her life back, and it was more beautiful, more peaceful than she had dared to imagine. As the last colors of the sunset faded into a soft, starry night, Nora leaned back in her chair, a quiet smile touching her lips. She had lost $30,000, but she had gained something far more valuable, herself.